Good evening. My name is Ed Hogan, associate pastor. I don't know what my title is here. I teach Wednesday night Bible studies at Cypress Methodist Church. Most of you listening in are a part of that regular crowd. If you're not, we welcome you to our Bible study. In Texas, we handle hot weather really well. Cold weather, not so much. And with our concern about what the weather would be like Wednesday night with high winds and the cold and the darkness, we decided that we would be safe and not asking everybody to come up here, but we would videotape the Wednesday night Bible study for you. So welcome. Glad you are here. And we're just going to jump right in. Now, normally we do, or for most of the fall, we've been doing Revelation. The last 3 Wednesdays, we've been looking at Christmas teachings. Beginning the first Wednesday of January, we're going to jump right in. We will finish the book of Revelation by Lent, and then we'll carry that all the way through Easter. So today, we're going to talk about some of the common misunderstandings about Christmas, and we're going to talk about which part is genuine and which part is real. Let me give this one disclaimer. I love Christmas. I love all of it. I love the whistles. I love the bells. I love the decorations, the smells, the food. But I think as Christians, it's important every year for us to examine which part of our ceremonies are actually biblical and which parts are things that have been added to. So the title of this is Christmas: Spiritual, Pagan, or Consumerism Run Wild. There are some common misunderstandings about Christmas. Now, when we look at a nativity set, the wise men are always there. The reason they're always there is they're so much part of the story, and they make such good characters. I mean, they've got the robes and the noble headdress and the camels and all of that. The truth is, these wise men from the Orient did not show up for a couple of years. We know that, for the scripture says, Herod found out when was the baby born, and then he backtracks and he said, I want every male child between 2 years old and that day put to death. So we do not want the possibility of a new king being in Israel. So the wise men were very central to the birth narrative, but they would have been there a couple of years later. When I was at Jersey Village, we did a walk through the park with these live nativity vignettes. And the very last one was the wise men. And intentionally, we had a little boy who was somewhere between 21 and 24 months. And that little boy was there, and he was there with his parents, his actual parents, who were playing the role of Joseph and Mary, and then the wise men were there. That one scene caused the most conversation, because people would come off the trail and go, that's not baby Jesus. Baby Jesus wasn't that old. But in reality, he was that old. These people did not just travel from the Orient, would have been hundreds of miles to the east, and get there that night. The shepherds showed up that night. The angels showed up that night. It was a wonderful scene. The wise men weren't there. Some people that I know actually have a nativity, and they put the wise men in another room heading in that direction, just to show, hey, we understand the wise men aren't here. Now, if you have a nativity set, please feel free to leave your wise men right there as a part of that. But do know where they were from and when they got there. Now, another thing about wise men is this: they were kind of this mix between astronomer, a scientific studier of the stars, and an astrologer. They read meanings into this. These people were incredibly wise, even though the Bible does not call them wise men. Here is something that people don't know as well. We don't know their name. I remember when I was in Crockett, Corrine Collins was teaching. Actually, it was a Sunday school party, and she had this question, And everybody looked around at me like I should know the answer. And the question was, what are the names of the three wise men? First of all, we don't know what their names were. The Bible doesn't tell us. History doesn't record that. Tradition says that their names are like Balthazar or something like that. I don't even try to remember it because it's not a part of the biblical text. Now, I'm kind of running on the fly here. I want to go back. I said the Bible doesn't call them wise men. Maybe it does, but I'm trying to remember. But that's not the point. The point is these astronomers/astrologers from the East, people that we do not know their name, even if you see their names in print, understand that is tradition that has given them those names. Now, what is important are the gifts that they bring: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Gold, the gift you'd give to a king; frankincense and myrrh, burial spices. And those are significant because it tells not only the life that Christ will live, but the death that he will go through as well. Now, another common element related to this is how big was the star. My mom used to keep a little nativity set on the TV. Now, I want you to use your memories. Kids and teenagers are going to struggle with this. Do you remember when a television was actually not just a flat screen on a wall? It was actually a piece of furniture. And it sat, and it had a wood frame, and it was big, and it sat in the middle of the room, and part of your decoration was to put something on top. My mom used to put the nativity set there, and there was a little hole in the back where you would put a single light through, and that light was the star. Mom wasn't happy with how big the light was, and so she put this huge light on top of the star, and it gave the illusion to us as kids that this star must have been incredibly large. Oh my goodness, how could you have missed it? We don't know how large the star was, but what we do know from the biblical text is that it wasn't evident to everyone. People had to ask. The king had to ask, when did this star show up? And only a few people knew when it happened. The wise men, these astronomers, knew when it happened. Now, somehow they're able to triangulate and let that star guide them to where the Christ child was. And they had this general idea, and as they went, the star guided and led them. Now, this to me is an interesting idea. Understand it is a holy hunch. It's not in the scripture itself. And the idea is this: did God just all of the sudden put a star in the sky saying my son was born here? Or did from the very dawn of creation, God with Christ and the Holy Spirit put this star into motion and into existence and into being, and exactly the right moment and exactly the right place, there it stood? To me, that's the much more intriguing option, but that's just an intellectual curiosity and not a part of the biblical text. It's amazing that God used a sign and wonder from nature to announce the birth of his child. There are more common misunderstandings. Number one is this: be careful if you're easily offended by Christmas things being ruined for you. We do not know the actual day that Christ was born. Now, as long as I've been alive, December 25th has been that day. And there's a reason, and we're going to talk about that. In the movie Back to the Future, you actually see where they say, if you want to go back and witness Christ being born, and he sets the clock, and it says December 25th, the year 00. Well, two things. Number one, we don't know exactly what year. The Augustinian monks in the 8th century created a calendar that went back to the supposed birth of Christ. The problem is they were using a lunar calendar and comparing it to a solar calendar, and they were off by anywhere between 4 to 6 years, so they couldn't even get the year right. Secondly, there's a reason why December the 25th is the actual day. We're going to talk about that in just a moment when we talk about Constantine and the Roman government and why that is the case. Another common misunderstanding is that we actually know where the manger is. If you were to travel to the Middle East, there would be people who would show you this is the burial plot of Christ. And there would be people a few hundred yards away who would say, no, this is it. And there's a church of the Nativity that was supposedly built over that spot. All of that is based on tradition. All of that is based on people's need to say this is the spot. Joseph and Mary were so common, so ordinary, so young, so poor, no one would have ever landmarked that spot to say this is where the Christ was born. People wouldn't even become aware for a long period of time all of the details about the birth of Christ. They have to put all these stories together. Now, tourism business is greatly aided by the ability to say this is the spot. When we went to Philippi, they said this is the prison where Paul was in prison. I was good enough to see there were about 8 jail cells, maybe 10 in a row. For me, it was good enough just to say he was in one of these. But there was an actual sign that says this is the one, and people were taking pictures. There's no way to know. There are no records. They did not mark the occasion to say this is Paul. When I went to Glenwood Springs in Colorado, I made this hike up the side of a mountain to see the gravesite of Doc Holliday. And they have this gravesite marked off, and people have left trinkets and other things, cards. But you read the sign, it says, we don't know for sure that this was his burial place, but we do know he's buried somewhere in this cemetery. People, when they come to see something like that, need to know. The truth is, we know the city of Bethlehem, and we know what kind of structure it was. It would have been a lean-to barn on the side of a house or a business, but we have no idea exactly. And if we did, the possibility that that structure still exists 2,000 years later. But people, when they travel and go to see, they want to see the exact spot. We don't know where that is. The other thing is we understate the scandal of all of this. Mary becoming pregnant in the midst of her engagement period, she and Joseph traveling together before their marriage was consummated. All of this would have been scandalous. I mean, can you imagine? Here's a single man showing up with a wife, not a wife, but a fiance who is 9 months pregnant and knocking on a door and saying, do you have a room for us? You could easily see an innkeeper saying, no, we're out of rooms. Or in his head going, no, we have no room for someone like you. This would have been scandalous in the day and time. We look back through the filter of time and we understand the purity of Mary, and we understand the purity of Joseph, and we understand the purity of that moment. But the people who existed in that time, in that place, would not have seen the event the same way that you and I do. Now, getting back to this December the 25th, have you ever heard about Constantine in 325? Constantine was a Roman Empire. There's a city named after him, Constantinople. He ruled in Rome 325 AD. Now, as the story goes, and these things become so much a part of legend and myth, we don't know the exact account, but we have a pretty good idea. Constantine, there's an army, the Roman army, that is approaching an enemy, and there is a bridge that they must cross. Bridges are places where you're incredibly vulnerable as an army to cross. And Constantine was confused, and he prayed for a sign. I don't know that Constantine had any idea who he was praying to. He just prayed for a sign. And in his words, a cross appeared over that bridge, and the army crossed and destroyed the enemy. And that so impressed Constantine. In his mind, it was a symbol from God, and it meant that Christianity needed to be no longer persecuted by the Roman government, but now needed to be adopted as the official religion of Rome. Now, several things I want to say there. First of all, God would never say, hey, there's a whole bunch of people over here. I'm giving you the green light. Go kill them. Go destroy them. I'm not saying whatever Constantine did or did not see. I'm just telling you that in my mind, understanding the character of God, there's no way that God led them into a battle where they would destroy people's lives. God did not work that way. Constantine, when he gets back, makes Christianity this part of the Roman Empire celebration. Now, what he does, instead of saying, okay, all of our holidays are out, and now we're going to replace them with Christian holidays, he took Christian holidays and linked them into Christmas holidays, and the Roman and the Christmas holidays were joined together. For example, Easter was around a fertility cult. Let me give you some examples. Why do you think rabbits are a part of Easter? Even today, 2,000 years after Christ, 1,700 years after Constantine, rabbits are still a part of Easter. Chickens lay eggs. Eggs are a part. Eggs are a part of a fertility cult symbol. Egg is the symbol of life. It is the symbol of birth and renewal. And so they take this very pagan holiday matched up with fertility cult symbols of rabbits being very reproductive and eggs, which are the sign of life, and puts that together with Easter. And that's why even today people celebrate Easter not only as a celebration of the cross and our understanding that it means the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ, but people still have Easter egg hunts. Churches still have them. Our church still has them. We do not associate evil with them or paganism in any way, so I'm not saying they're negative. I'm not saying they're evil. I'm just saying it's fascinating to me as a student of history that 1,700 years later, we still see the vestiges of Roman pagan holidays that have been wed together. Now, Easter was wed together with a holiday known as Saturnalia. Saturnalia was celebrated at first only on the solstice of winter, the shortest day of the year. The idea is if Saturn was the god of light and the god of time, on the shortest day of the year, this is the people's way of bringing gifts and celebration and telling Saturn, it's time to wake back up. It's time for the days to begin to be longer. It's time for time to begin to move toward the spring, toward green, toward growth. Now, if you do a research about Saturnalia, and by the way, my gift to you for Christmas is on the table out front in the Mac. There's a handout about Saturnalia where you can actually read about it. People would bring greenery into their houses, evergreens. It not only would it make the houses more fragrant, it would give the sign of life. It would show that everything was vibrant and beautiful. And these evergreen pieces, garlands and wreaths, if you will, would be brought into the house. Now, according to the Roman calendar of the day, winter solstice was on December 25th. According to our calendar, winter solstice is December the 21st. So the December the 25th date was chosen by Constantine, not because of his knowledge of biblical history, not because of his need to be biblically accurate, but because it coincided with a pre-existing holiday that the Romans were celebrating. Now, what's interesting is, over the years, things have expanded. In Europe, there were a lot of deist people that believed that God resided in plants and animals. And there were a lot of these rituals that went around with the winter solstice. People would go into forests and put candles on trees with the idea that you're lighting the way for the gods to be able to find their way back to your forest. Sometimes they would tie little strings around trees and leave trinkets for the gods to entice them to come back and bring the forest back to life. Sometimes they would tie strings with food on these trees so that the gods would be, if they had been hibernating, when they came back, they would be hungry and they would have something to eat. Now, I want you to think with me, if you're superstitious and you go out and you wrap your strings of food around these trees and you come back and the food is gone, you think, oh, the gods have feasted, therefore winter is about to end. They're awake, they're alive, they've come back to visit. New life, new birth is on the way. Of course, you and I know that birds and animals would have feasted off of that food tied to the trees. And so if we came back and saw those things empty, we would go, well, of course they are. You can't leave food in a forest. Think about our connection to Christmas trees. Does any of that sound familiar? Evergreen trees, lights hanging on the trees, trinkets, Christmas bulbs hanging on trees. Did any of you put strands of popcorn around a Christmas tree as a child? Now, what is fascinating to me is that some of these practices are hundreds of years old, and yet they still exist as a part of our Christmas tradition. Now, America has put its own unique brand on Christmas, and it doesn't come from pagan holidays. It doesn't come from ancient practices. It comes from a desire to be consumers and to provide the marketplace with things that they would purchase. Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer is an invention of Hollywood. Frosty the Snowman, an invention of Hollywood. In connection to the Hallmark cards and all of these things, there became this big industry. It was supported by records. It was supported by television program. It was supported by movies. And then you start to see that all of these things appear in stores. And you can now take Rudolph home with you. You can take Frosty home with you. You can take all of these Christmas characters. I hate to burst a bubble again, but the Little Drummer Boy was a figment of a songwriter's imagination and not a part of the biblical story. Now, I love Pentatonic's version of the Little Drummer Boy. If you haven't heard it, it's masterful. It's all a cappella, and it's a wonderful song. But we have to understand that the Roman government had its impact on Christmas, and Europe had its impact on Christmas, and American consumerism had its impact on Christmas. Now, I can hear some of you saying, hey, Hogan, when did you become Scrooge? I'm not telling you that any of that is evil. I'm not telling you that any of that's awful. I'm not telling you to go throw all of your Christmas trees in the street and burn them. I like all that stuff. In my house, there are snowmen, there are reindeer, there are ornaments, there are, all those things are there. We listen to Christmas music. It's all a part of who we are. And I have my own favorite. I like the Mariah Carey song. My kids at school love that. I like some of the songs that you may not expect. I like Bruce Springsteen's version of Santa Claus is Coming to Town. I like John Cougar Mellencamp's version of I Saw Mama Kissing Santa Claus. I like those songs. But as a Christian, I come to the understanding and the point where I go, but all of that can become so distracting that I forget the main part of what Christmas is. Christmas is a celebration of the birth of Christ. And as fun and significant as all those things are in terms of being a part of our Christmas celebrations, we have to understand that the birth narrative is very simple, it is very straightforward, but it is packed with imagery and packed with meaning. I am so grateful that at Christmas time, when we were small children, we participated in all of these things. We had a Christmas tree and we woke up to Christmas presents and we did all of these things. But on Christmas Eve, my father would get out the family Bible and he would read the Christmas story to us as a family. And then he would pray, thanking God for the gift of his son. I will never forget that, because my father and my mother found a way to make sure that in the midst of all of the fun and all of the gift giving and all of the decorating and all of the eating, there was a message that had to come through loud and clear. And that is the message of the greatest gift ever given to me and to you, is that Jesus was born and became Emmanuel, God with us. Now, a couple of points I want to make. Government corrupts religion. Christians prayed for the day in those first 3 centuries when the Roman government would no longer have them as an illicit religion, in the day that they would no longer be persecuted. They must have said our prayers have been answered when Constantine lifts that from them, and more than that, puts their holidays as a part of the Roman holiday calendar. But what happened is, as he endorsed it, he also corrupted it. It became associated with holidays which had no spiritual meaning, and in doing so, lessened the understanding of what the days really meant. Religion cannot do anything but corrupt. Government cannot do anything but corrupt religion. Our First Amendment says that the government says 2 things. The government cannot establish a state religion, because by definition a government-run religion will be corrupt. But it said it also cannot prohibit religious expression. It's the freedom of religion. I'm so incredibly grateful that you and I live in a country where we can express our Christian belief in Christmas, and the government can never prohibit us from doing that. Consumerism also corrupts Christianity. When you reduce Christmas as nothing more than a trip to the mall to buy stuff, the day has lost its meaning. Now, I enjoy gifts and I enjoy all of that, but I'm telling you, if you see me in a mall between now and Christmas, call Silver Alert. Something has gone horribly wrong. I did not mean to be there. I'm not supposed to be there. I want nothing to do with that mad dash, because consumerism associated with Christmas drives me crazy. It becomes frantic and it loses the entire message of what Christmas is really all about. Let me encourage you. Have fun with the Christmas stuff. Enjoy your trees. Enjoy your evergreen. I think it's fascinating to understand where all of these holiday traditions come about. And as a student of history, I want to know where they came about. But I also want to know the difference between fact and fiction. I don't need to know the exact day Jesus was born. Most religious scholars say it was probably in the spring because the winter weather would have been too harsh for the shepherds to have been out in the field, and the calving season didn't happen, or the birthing season didn't happen until later in the spring. I'm okay with that. I don't need to know the exact date. Now, fortunately for us, because of Passover, we know the exact date of the crucifixion of Christ. Now, the calendar, as you know, Easter appears at different times every year. We might not know the exact day on the calendar, but we do know that it was Friday of Passover week. I'm okay with the mystery of Christmas. I don't need to know the exact day he was born. I don't need to know the exact spot. Sunday morning we talked with the kids. If you could go to an antique dealer and find the actual manger that Jesus was birthed in, if you could prove it, there are no telling how many billions of dollars that would cost. That's a relic that would exceed any expectation. I'm okay, because the truth of Christmas is more spiritual than it is physical. The truth of Christmas is that God came to dwell with us. The truth of Christmas is God remembered his people. He remembered what he had said in the Old Testament, and he was faithful, and he gave his son to become our Savior. That spiritual truth is all I need in this holiday season. So the message is, enjoy all the Christmas stuff. Eat way too much. If you have small kids, enjoy the gift opening on Christmas morning. As a parent who now has children in their 30s, let me tell you, those days when they are small, they go by in the blink of an eye. I'd give anything to go back to one of those Christmas mornings when my children were small. Now, my kids are coming over on the 23rd. We still celebrate, but it's different when we're grown up. There's a certain magic. Enjoy that magic. Enjoy that time. If your family is coming together and gathering together for Christmas, enjoy that. Talk about how beautiful the tree is. Talk about how beautiful the home is, how it smells like life, and the cinnamon and the evergreens giving this wonderful aroma. Eat way too much food. Do what you do. But I think it's important as well that we know the difference between reality and make-believe. I started with a question. Is Christmas spiritual, pagan, or consumerism run wild? The answer is yes. But Christmas really is what we make it. It will be as spiritual as we make it. It could be as pagan as we make it. It could be consumerism run wild if we don't keep ourselves in check. Just make sure that as you celebrate the Christmas season, that you take just a moment to thank God for the gift of his son, the greatest Christmas gift ever given. I hope you have a great week, and we look forward to seeing you on Saturday. Let me remind you, Christmas Eve, 4 o'clock, a more family-friendly, a little bit more contemporary worship service. 7 o'clock here in the MAC as well, but a little bit of a more traditional feel. And then at 11 o'clock, the service that will take us over into Christmas morning. That 11 o'clock is going to be in the sanctuary. Now, for all of my regulars, I have some packets for you at the front desk of the MAC. Pick those up, do some reading, do some more study on all of this. And I will look forward to seeing you on December the 24th. Now, at that moment, we will be embracing the spiritual and the truth that Scripture has to teach us. That could be and should be the very centerpiece of our Christmas experience. God bless you and your family. Merry Christmas.